Good morning. It's February 2nd, Mr. Ashburn's birthday. Frank Davis Ashburn, our founding headmaster, was born 114 years ago today. A graduate of Groton and Yale who was so talented he was offered a Rhodes Scholarship, but turned it down. Who, while in college, was chosen to pitch in an exhibition game against the Yankees and had the good sense to walk the great Lou Gehrig. And who gave up his spot at Columbia Law School when he was 23 years old because his high school headmaster, Endicott Peabody, asked him to lead a brand new school. A man who, even at 23, 2 years younger than Mr. Wagner, had a sense of what he wanted this school to be. A man whose vision for this community centered on character, compassion, and responsibility for oneself and for others. A spiritual man, a poet, a man who, it is said, could expel you or fire you and leave you thanking him on your way out the door. A man I knew, and the reason I'm here. So this is the perfect day for me to talk with you. You see, this past summer marked my 50th year on this campus. Imagine being so closely tied to one place for 50 years. First as a child and the daughter of a graduate, then as a student. As a faculty kid, a faculty member. As an alum, the parent of a student and the parent of a graduate. I think I've worn almost every hat there is to wear here over the last half century, and I've seen a lot. So I struggled over what to offer you today through the lens of those 50 years. So much comes to mind. Snapshots of the school as it developed. Portraits of the people who shaped it and shaped me. Major events in the school's history, and smaller ones that nonetheless shaped its character. I thought and wrote for a long time before I settled on this. It's a ranging reflection, and it's also something else. It's a love letter. I moved here in August of 1966 with my little brother Todd and my parents, French teachers hired by Mr. Ashburn. So I grew up here. I've lived in many of the faculty houses and been part of many of the dorms. Like my dad and brother and daughter and son, I went here, graduating in 1981, the first co-ed class with Lucy Verdone's mom, Meredith. Then I went off into the world. At Williams, I studied psychology and languages. I wanted to be an ambassador without really knowing what that meant. Then I got interested in the legal system and went to law school. I got my law degree and got to lawyering, earning an office on the 31st floor of a glass tower, overlooking Boston Harbor with a secretary and a company credit card and a bigger paycheck than my parents would ever see in their lives. It's also where I met a young Jack Steele, whose son Dylan I would one day teach. The flash of that lifestyle and the money that went along with it seduced me. It was the Wolf of Wall Street era, and that movie was more accurate than I care to admit. Within a few years, though, I began to understand that while it fed my ego, that life didn't feed my soul. Because remember, I grew up here. I went here. I was fully a product of this place and all that it stands for. I didn't understand it yet, but I knew I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. The law wasn't my calling. I needed something more meaningful. I'm going to fast forward through the rest of my journey. A move to journalism, more legal work, a chance opening in the Brooks Alumni Office, and then my final landing place in the classroom here. There are a lot of stories there, and in thinking about them and reflecting on my path and how I ended up back here, something began to dawn on me. You all know our mission statement by heart. Say it with me. At Brooks School, we seek to provide the most meaningful educational experience our students will have in their lives. Nicely done. And you've also read our core values, displayed in huge letters along the first floor hallway. Integrity, passion, engagement, empathy, creativity, confidence. Maybe you've looked at them in a cynical moment and thought, that's just marketing. That's not real. But it is. And the importance of this experience and the truth of those values became clear to me as I was writing these, the lessons I've learned over 50 years at Brooks. Lesson 1. It's not about the hat. When I went to Brooks, there were a lot of rules. The dress code was stricter. The schedule was hectic. The classes rigorous. The workload heavy. And free time hard to come by. Chapel and sit-down happened more often. There was less freedom to leave campus, even on weekends. And there's always some eagle-eyed adult ready to pounce on us for every little infraction. My own mother was the dean of students. I couldn't figure out why they cared so much about the rules, even though I generally followed them. Honestly, Mom, I only snuck out a couple of times. This may seem hard for you to believe, especially if you and I have ever had a conversation about your hat, leggings, sweatshirt, sweatpants, sweatshorts, skirt length, phone use, language, dish stealing, presents in a locked room, wandering during study hall, or whatever. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if this describes you. It probably describes most of you. So how did I move from a kid like you, resenting the adults and their rules about hats, to a teacher whose job it is to enforce them? Simple. I went out in the world. In the real world, I learned that civil society requires structure and accountability, and that's what rules provide. All your life, you'll be living, studying, or working in a community with a structure you must operate within to be successful. This is the start of learning that. Here, you'll come to understand that rules exist for a reason. You'll gain the self-discipline to follow them and the courage to challenge and change them if you think they're wrong. Here, you can make a mistake, make amends, find forgiveness, and learn. Here, the rules will help you grow, and eventually you'll understand what my friend Will Ghibli now knows after 4 painful years of conversations. It's not really about the hat. Lesson 2, the ones who push you the hardest teach you the most. In my English class, Mr. Dunnell required such precision of language that I had to slow down and really think before I spoke, contrary to my impulse to blurt. My advisor, Mr. McCahill, challenged me to expand my intellectual scope. No matter how well I was doing in school, he always had a suggestion for how to push myself, even when the last thing I wanted to do was push myself. And my AP French teacher, my dad, whose teaching style was a little crazy, demanded so much of us in preparation for that exam that I read more and wrote more that year than I ever thought I could, and in French. It was exhausting and stressful, and I was so glad to graduate and get away from this small place where the teachers were right in my face all the time. In college, the adults didn't know me. No one cared about anything I did except turning in papers and taking exams. What a relief. But here's the thing. I barely remember any of my college classes. I can't name many professors, but for a few weird animal behavior facts, I recall very little of the substance. However, in law school, law practice, and journalism, those early lessons on precision of speech, intellectual depth, and perseverance are what helped me succeed. I still use them today. If I've ever pushed you to think carefully about your word choice, or encouraged you to stretch rather than take the easy way, or made you work harder than you thought you could, or been just a little bit crazy in class, I'm just passing on what I learned from them. They were hard on me, and I got more from them than any other teachers in my life. Turns out that the ones who push you the hardest teach you the most. Lesson 3, everything you say and do matters, so be thoughtful. Class had started, and the student with a chronic punctuality problem was late again. Exasperated, I squawked at him, resorting to what I thought was humor to address the moment. "Okay, Josh, what was it this time? Were you out in the woods smoking crack?" He laughed, apologized again, and took his seat. Class went on. When the bell rang, one of the quieter girls in the class lingered. "Hey, Emily, what's up?" "Miss Perkins, you know how you said at the beginning of the year that if we're ever uncomfortable in class, we should tell you?" "Yep." "Well, today, what you said to Josh," she trailed off. I wasn't sure where this was going. "Yeah, I remember." She paused, her face clouded. She blurted, "My brother's addicted to crack. It's ruining his life, all of our lives. I wish you wouldn't joke about it." I made my apology. We talked, and I like to think she left feeling a little better. But I felt deeply ashamed. I'd been lazy. I'd gone for a cheap laugh. I'd forgotten the main rule I try to live by. You never know what someone else is going through. Tread lightly. Of course, there was no way for me to know what the struggle Emily and her family were going through, but I do know and did know then that many of us are affected by addiction, that for the family members of addicts, it's a secret shame, an invisible burden we carry, a suffocating weight we can't escape. I knew that. I should have known better, been more thoughtful, exercised my authority more carefully. It was a hard reminder of this truth. We don't know anyone else's life, and we should never assume our experience parallels theirs. Everything we say and everything we do has impact. We must be thoughtful. Lesson 4. Don't forget to have fun. On Sundays, we met in the Dulcimer room. Max led the group, a brilliant, cynical senior whose sharp, incisive humor kept us laughing all afternoon. We were an improv group. That's right, improvisational comedy got me through some of the toughest moments in high school. Though we were very different, we possessed the same impulse to use humor to cope, and the same need to let go and have fun. Just like today. Back then, we all felt class pressure, social pressure, family pressure, college pressure, and it would have been easy to keep it to ourselves, to bottle it up as it seemed others did. But we chose not to. Together, we became comfortable being our silliest and let go of all that stress for a little while. For me, fun has always been one of the best stress relievers, and the best kinds of fun come from our own creativity. While I was here, I countered my stress with doing improv, also by singing, acting, reading, climbing trees, and yes, pulling the occasional prank. Kenzo was right. I may be the reason Endicott Peabody is now bolted to his pedestal. He moved around on campus a lot when I was here, and he liked to dress up for the holidays. He had a lot more fun back then. At Brooks, I learned what stress felt like, what it could do to me. I learned that I needed to be attentive to it and to address it when I felt it rising. And I had the space and encouragement to find ways to balance my life and cope with that stress, to find activities outside of work to relieve it. I was a nerd, for sure, but I wasn't only a nerd. And those moments, exercising my creative side, made all the difference in my happiness here, and they still do. Nurturing your creativity will help you find balance as life gets stressful. Don't forget to have fun. Lesson 5, you belong here. Just like me, you are Brooks School. Every year I have this conversation with at least one student. I don't think I fit in here. I'm just not the Brooks type. And every year it breaks my heart. If you take nothing else from my reflections today, please take this. There's no such thing as the Brooks type. Or maybe a better way to say it, every one of us is the Brooks type. That's the essence of who we are. Mr. Ashburn opened these doors on September 29th, 1927, with 14 boys as his only students. What must they have been like, these young boys brave enough to step into this new, unproven venture, led by a recent college grad with no experience at all? I imagine they were different from each other and from the typical boarding school kids of that time. I imagine they were adventurous and brave. I imagine they were scared. I imagine they were like you. And each one of them added texture and substance to the Brooks that was becoming. And after them came so many students who didn't know when they arrived here the impact they would have. I think of DeForest Diffie Mellon, class of 32, the very first boy to arrive on this campus 2 days early because his mother got confused. And who loved this place so much that he never wanted to leave. And he got his wish, and you can visit him along the lake trail near the boathouse. I think of my dad, Skip Perkins, class of 56, first in the wave of day students and financial aid kids to come to Brooks, opening the school in new ways. I think of Sophia Unger, class of 66, to my knowledge our first transgender alumna, who had the courage to come back to her 50th reunion last year, and who found love and acceptance among her classmates despite her fears. I think of Frank Benson, class of 68, the first black student to attend Brooks, courageous enough to step into this all-white world, so far from his native New Haven, and pave the way for so many, opening up the school even more. I think of my own classmates, brave enough to be the first girls at an all-boys school, knowing that there were students and graduates and even teachers here who vehemently objected to coeducation, believing we girls would ruin this school. They were obviously wrong. We made it so much better. I think of Margila in the class of 11, our first student to wear hijab. The lessons she taught this community have never been more important than they are right now. And I think of you. Every one of you brings something different, and that's why you're here. You're not here to be like anybody else. Mrs. Eggertson didn't read your application and say, "Oh, good, she seems just like everybody else. Let's accept her." Just the opposite, in fact. When you applied, you worked hard to differentiate yourself from the rest of the pool. And you did it. Don't ever forget that. And don't then turn around and spend the next few years sacrificing all that glorious individuality at the altar of conformity. Please don't. You're here to be your best, most authentic self. That's what makes our school ever better. There's no Brooks type. There's you. You heard Mr. Packard say last week that Brooks is a place that remembers well. And he's right, of course. We do remember well. As I walk Dash the dog around campus, I think about all the folks memorialized here, from the front gate to the boathouse. Most are people I knew, people whose stories I know, people I want you to know, because each one is a thread in our shared fabric. You are too. You are here and you are Brooks, and that will never change. When you leave, however that happens, you'll still have been an important and necessary element of this school's evolution. Dr. Mav Madoff tells you when we gather here that you are loved, and that's not just formulaic religious speech. I want you to know the same thing. You're an important part of this community right now. You belong here. You are loved. You matter, and we're always here for you. So this is it. My love letter to Brooks School, and to you. And if I got to pick one more core value to add to that wall, that's what I'd add. Love. What drove Mr. Ashburn 90 years ago, what drives me today, and what binds us all together. Thank you.